I talk about the eons and the paths quite a lot on this channel whenever I cover Honkai Star Rail. I mean, the gods of the Star Rail universe are some of the most mysterious and compelling entities in the story, and there are quite a number of them. So when I made a video talking about which path you should follow if you got Isekaid, it was tough to cover everything in a single video. As such, this will be the third and final installment of that particular video series. Part 1 and 2 are already out if you're curious, but you don't really need to watch them to understand this one. In any case, let's close out the last 5 paths I've yet to discuss. Before we do that though, if you want to see more Honkai Star Rail content, do consider subscribing to the channel. Much like the last 2 videos, the point of this video is to figure out what you might get out of resonating with a particular path, assuming you were isekai into Honkai Star Rail. What activities would you be expected to do as part of the path? What factions or groups could you join? And what would happen if you somehow got the Aeon's gaze? As before, you are also not the protagonist here, so no plot armor or special bonuses that will catapult you to the top after joining a faction for a mere 2 days. That's the point of view we'll be taking when considering the pros and cons of each of these paths. Now that you're caught up on the premise, let's start off with a path all about the distribution of your seed. The path of propagation. Several Amber eras ago, there was once a bug from the Coleoptera species who was the last of its kind. Due to its unending loneliness, this cosmic insect mutated and changed itself, becoming a self-duplicating monstrosity. It made copies of itself, and those copies made more copies, and so on and so forth until the swarm was born. A mass of planet-eating insects flying through the empty void of space, eating and attacking anything they run into. They were so destructive that it was thought that they were indirectly responsible for the birth of the actual god of destruction, Nanook. Azeroth has long since been dead, however, though its swarm lives on continuously replicating and being a general nuisance overall. Now, if what I just described to you sounds at all appealing, then yeah, sure, resonate with this path. But it's very, very likely that you just end up getting eaten or worse, having insects lay eggs in your body or something. I don't think there's any benefit for a normal human to align with this path, nor would there be any reason to. There's no camaraderie or friendship to be built here, and the bugs are its sole members. The only bright side, I guess, is that since the Aeon is long since deceased, there really isn't any god that will cast its gaze on you, and who knows, you might even be able to ascend to the empty throne of propagation. Overall, I would suggest avoiding this path, but if for some reason you want to reignite the path of propagation and ascend to Aeonhood through your own nighttime efforts or activities, since you are a human and not a bug, then it's a depravity on the levels of Slanesh that may not be as fun as it sounds. That's also assuming you can convince another human being to join you. Otherwise, like I mentioned, the membership is made up entirely of just space bugs. Now, if you wish to forget that disturbing image, then the next path is probably perfect for you. The path of enigmata, which focuses on obscuring the truth and knowledge about the universe. Its Aeon, Mythos, believes that sentient and mortal creatures are just incapable of comprehending the wider universe and its secrets. In fact, it might even be dangerous for such simple minds to gain access to dangerous knowledge, at least according to the enigmata. Because of this belief, Mythos and the Path of Enigmata strive to ensure that as much information in and about the universe remains unclear, covered in a fog of the unknown. Now, if you're a troll and you like confusing people, or you have some weird superiority complex and believe the same thing Mythos does, then you might actually feel at home here. One of its factions, the history fictionologists, focus on obscuring knowledge by altering facts. They intentionally confuse people by changing long-known common knowledge to something questionable. It's kinda like turning facts into the equivalent of those old wives' tales you hear that may sound legit, but you just can't be sure about them. They also actively ensure knowledge remains lost, so that things they deem dangerous don't become public knowledge. The second faction that follows this path, the Riddlers, are even more screwed up as they focus their efforts entirely in obscuring knowledge, so no one can spread information. Every conversation becomes a contextual nightmare, as if the riddles have their way, every word becomes something different to someone else. Now, while I do sound like I'm being a little harsh on both these factions, only pointing out their problems, there are circumstances where hiding knowledge could produce greater good. I mean, I'm sure you would have encountered situations where a white lie produces an overall good, or perhaps obscuring knowledge on dangerous weapons or something can keep people safe. One could argue that doing so may bring some good overall. The problem here is that doing so comes with a presumption that you know what's best for everyone else, and to act in the path of the enigmata means to ensure the world lives in ignorance for better or worse. The path is overall a safe one, given the factions aren't too extreme in their practices, but I'd imagine you'd have some pretty tough opposition from those who follow the erudition or remembrance. So this is a pretty neutral option, but one that could quickly become dangerous depending on how far you'd be willing to go to obscure the truth. In addition, gaining the gaze of its aeon can be seen as both good and bad. Good because you gain more power the more you obscure things, and bad in that now you might know what Mythos looks like and it might not like that. It's an ever-present risk that you really can't account for. Moving on to the next path. While the enigmata are trying to move the scale so that everyone remains ignorant and the erudition looks to discover as much of the universe as possible, there is a path that sits at the center, the equilibrium. The aeon of the equilibrium, Ho'o or Hu, or I don't know, I'm not gonna try to pronounce that again, is an aeon that was said to have originally existed as a singular entity but has split itself into two. The path of the equilibrium is as middle of the road as one can get, as they only concern themselves with ensuring everything in the universe is in constant balance. Whenever I hear the word balance, I can't help but think that it could be taken to either extremes. On one side, perhaps they try to maintain the number of invasive species in a particular location to curb overpopulation of said species. On the other hand, they could end up like Thanos, thinking killing half of everything will ensure there are more resources to go around. Now, to be fair, we don't really know much about them, and this interpretation could be inaccurate. There are also indications that it's probably on the side of good. As part of the simulated universe, it's mentioned that after Enna the Order was absorbed into the Path of Harmony, the equilibrium's duties have only grown greater. This seems to indicate that at the very least, the pursuit of balance is for the greater good and on the side of order, or at least promotes it in some way. There is only one faction associated with the equilibrium known as the arbitrators. This particular group tries to exemplify the balance that the equilibrium creates, but in truth, their mortal understanding of it prevents them from such a goal. They are essentially a group that claims to understand the beauty of the equilibrium through seemingly opposite concepts that the mortal mind can grasp. Good and evil, love and hatred, joy and sorrow, each an example of a zero-sum circumstance that leads to what they believe as balance. To be honest, I'm not really sure what it is they actually do, but it seems like they work towards correcting or balancing out these concepts in some way. Because the description we have of them is so vague, I don't really know what activities you might even be involved with should you join them. So for this particular group, I'd have to say it's unclear. What we can be sure of is that it's likely both good and bad, because, it's balanced. We are now near the end of this list, and the next path is one we mustn't forget. The path of remembrance. The aeon of remembrance is on a singular mission, to record as much of the universe as possible, especially the important bits. It's believed that the reason it does this is because at some point, it expects the universe to end, likely at the hands of one of the other aeons, like destruction. Because of this, it looks to preserve as much about this current universe as possible, at least that's what most have speculated. In truth, we don't really know why Fuli does this, and the only faction that follows the Aeon of Remembrance, the Garden of Recollection, doesn't really know either. What they do know is that if a godlike being is doing it, then it must be worth doing. Kinda like how the followers of preservation follow their Aeon Clipoth. So the Garden of Recollection follow in the footsteps of their Aeon as well, and witness, record, and store all the memories that they can find. Now on the surface, you might think that following the path of remembrance isn't too bad. I mean, preserving the happiest and greatest memories the universe has to offer is something that seems like a noble pursuit, kinda like historians of sorts. The problem is, if you join the Garden of Recollection, your life kinda revolves around all this memory collection. In fact, it seems to be the only thing you will do. You won't really have a normal life, and it'll just be focused around collecting the memories of important events, regardless of whether you join as a low-ranking member or not. On top of that, the Memo Keepers are said to have shed their mortal flesh and live as mimetic entities, a gift Fuli itself grants to them. What this means is that you cease to be a physical being, and while not being constrained to physical limitations means you are not encumbered by things like walls and doors, it might also mean you can't lead a normal life. It's still a pretty cool thing though if you have no personal ambitions yourself, since you will be given the ability to essentially witness the most significant events in the universe every day. If you somehow do a good job at this, perhaps because you were a stalker in your past life or something, then you might gain the gaze of Fu Li. I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing, but the Aeon of Remembrance really only appears or takes interest in significantly important events, so gaining her gaze may indicate you are meant for greater things, something the universe has yet to reveal to you. Or it might mean you're just given more powers to secretly spy on other people. So collecting memories sounds pretty straightforward, but unless you are fully devoted to this ideal, the Garden of Recollection might not be something you want to join since you will be forced to collect memories for their god. At last we have reached the ending. The final one on this list is the path of, well, finality. No, I did not wait this long to talk about this particular path for a joke, it's just a happy accident. Of all the paths we've talked about on this list, the finality is one of the least known and least understood. Even the way the game has described this path largely comes from legends and rumors. Essentially, the Aeon of Finality terminus is said to exist at the very end of time. The path supposedly represents the ultimate end of the universe, at least according to one of the factions that follow it, and why its Aeon's true form exists only when all things end. The story goes that Terminus travels backwards in time, all the while murmuring to itself a prophecy that is destined to be fulfilled. This, combined with the idea that Terminus represents the end of the universe, heavily implies that there is a very specific and planned ending to the universe itself. What makes this difficult to confirm is that Terminus doesn't actively interact with the other followers of the Path of Finality and seems to be fixated solely on bringing about this specific end. There are currently two factions that follow Terminus and the Path of Finality, the Creed Exeki and the Omen Vanguards. The Creed Exeki all believe that because Terminus travels back in time, at some point they will get an audience with the god itself. What exactly they aim to achieve from this meeting is unknown, though it seems unlikely that Terminus would be bothered with them given its fixation on its mission. The Omen Vanguards, on the other hand, are more interested in the prophecies that Terminus is said to mumble as it travels in time. They draw on his ramblings and from that information alone, discern what they claim to be prophecies of the future. This particular faction is also the one that believes Terminus represents the end of the universe and why they suspect he knows how the story will progress. On the surface, you might think that the Omen Vanguards are just nuts and there's no way listening to the ramblings of an Aeon can tell you the future. I would be inclined to believe this as well if not for the rumor that Elio, the person with the ability to supposedly see all possible futures, is suspected to be aligned with Terminus. So if you were to join either of these factions, I highly doubt you will be given such gifts, and that's even if these rumors are true in the first place. That said, if it does turn out to be true, you might end up getting the same ability as Elio, though again, you're not the main character here, so it's still unlikely. Either way, both don't seem to be too dangerous since we're not sure if either group acts in any significant way. The Path of Finality might be the most interesting one on this particular list given there's not much to lose if they turn out to be insane and a lot to gain if you put in some effort. Even if you're not the protagonist, knowing how the future might turn out may help you get rich, avoid unknown pitfalls, and even help others. This is the path I'd personally choose on this particular list just because I like spoilers. That makes up all the possible paths that one could possibly follow spread across 3 videos. Now with a lot of these paths, you'd notice that you either should avoid them outright or some of the ones you could join has kinda negative repercussions the deeper you go into them. That doesn't make them bad choices. We just don't know too much about a bunch of them and there could be elements of good in any of them. Plus, as I've mentioned in the previous videos, even if you were Isekaid to this universe, the reality is that you don't have to only follow one path. You could actually align yourself with a multitude of them like multiclassing in D&D and act in a way that fits your current mood or personality. There isn't a wrong answer here, so don't take this too seriously. I've had fun making these videos, so let me know in the comment if knowing about these last 5 have changed your choices overall. If you enjoyed the video, do consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and as usual, have a nice day.